The theft continued until Easter, when Noah said he had an announcement to make. "So do I," Saul shouted, cutting him off. "Noah is the thief." Noah was flabbergasted. It was clear that he had been about to accuse Saul of the same thing, but by beating him to it, his younger brother had stolen his credibility. "You're not even eating them," Noah whined, as Father Isaac separated the two fighting brothers. "You're just throwing them away." Saul stared at Noah. Anger had twisted his face into something unfamiliar and wrong. For a second, I didn't recognize my own brother. "Someone is watching who hears your lies," he snarled, "and you will not escape from judgment." That, too, turned out to be a prophecy of sorts. Because Noah didn't wake up the following morning. To all appearances, his heart had just stopped in his sleep. But I could help but suspect there was more to it than that. Noah and his little brother shared a room, after all. And was it really possible that Saul hadn't noticed his death overnight? Not unless he caused it, I remember thinking darkly. Father Isaac didn't dare risk our lives by returning to the surface for Noah's burial, so we gave him last rites and disposed of his body the only way we could. In pieces, with the trash. We could hear Father Isaac sobbing in the kitchen as he swung the meat cleaver. Judith murmured a prayer. I looked at my shoes. Only Saul was smiling. Our family was never the same after that. On the surface, life continued just as before. The same meals, the same prayers, the same daily rituals. But the joy had gone out of it. We no longer splashed each other with our mop buckets during chores, and the soccer ball no longer boomed against the walls of the empty storage room after dinner. Without Noah's steady, high-pitched voice, even the hymns we sang felt different. Meanwhile, our issues with the bunker continued. The lights went out in the wing where Saul slept. Father Isaac thought that maybe rats had chewed through the cords, but there had been no sign of vermin during the entire 2.5 years that we'd been living underground. Later, several leaks appeared in the same hallway. No matter how many of them we patched, more kept appearing, filling the area with puddles, mildew, and a maddening dripping sound. I didn't understand how Saul could stand it down there, but the truth was, I was glad to see less of him. Father Isaac and Judith may have been baffled by the power outages and plumbing issues, but I wasn't. More and more, I was convinced that Saul was sabotaging the bunker. I didn't want to believe it, because that might mean that my other, fouler suspicions about Noah's death were also true. It was only then that the bunker began to feel like a prison. We were living on half rations, in the dark most of the time. Constant exposure to the damp, moldy air had caused all of us to develop a worrying cough. Worst of all, however, were the problems with the water supply. One morning, we woke up to find the faucets sputtering and spitting a disgusting gray sludge. It was as though the well we depended on had somehow gone dry. Father Isaac agonized over the problem for days, asking aloud whether this was a sign that we should finally leave the bunker. After all, we could live with minimal food and light, but we couldn't live without water. Then, on the third day, the water came back without warning, flowing from the taps in a glorious, clear flood. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We chugged it down, practically shoving one another away from the faucets as we fought to drink our fill. We were all so desperately thirsty that none of us, not even Father Isaac, thought to boil it first. A few hours later, Father Isaac, Judith, and I were hunched over on the shower room floor, vomiting a thin black liquid into the drain. Even after there was nothing left in my stomach, my body kept convulsing, fighting to free itself from whatever corruption had taken hold inside. I don't recall much of what happened after that. I drifted in and out of sickening dreams. One in which Judith was curled up nude in the corner of the bathroom, howling like an animal. Another in which Father Isaac smashed his face into the mirror again and again, begging for forgiveness. A third in which Saul crawled across the ceiling with his head twisted around backwards, staring down at us with hollow, empty eyes. Maybe I'm already dead, I remember thinking. Maybe this is hell. When I awoke 72 hours later, the mirror lay in shattered fragments on the bathroom floor. Judith, Father Isaac, and I seemed to have made an unspoken agreement to never speak of those feverish days. It was as though we were all somehow ashamed of them, although I couldn't have said why. Only Saul seemed to have been completely unaffected by the sickness, just as he was unbothered by the dark and damp. If anything, he seemed more comfortable in it. Father Isaac decreed that from now on, all water had to be boiled at least 20 minutes before use. For us, that meant less energy and even more darkness. I came to dread each trip I made into the lightless parts of the bunker. Whenever I rounded a corner, I was sure Saul would be there, observing me in the pitch blackness. When the family was gathered together, he acted almost normal, but I was afraid of what he might do if he caught me alone. 5 months later, Judith's pregnancy began to show. I knew the facts of life, just as I knew that neither I nor my younger brother could be the father, which left only one extremely uncomfortable possibility. A miracle is in our midst, Father Isaac declared, an immaculate conception. With the arrival of this child, perhaps our long time of trial will finally come to an end. I wasn't fully sure that I believed Father Isaac's words, but the strangest part was, both he and Judith did. Maybe I'm wrong again, I remember thinking. Maybe my family really has been chosen by God, and I just don't have enough faith to see it. 15 months later, however, the food had almost run out, and Judith still hadn't given birth. It shouldn't have been medically possible, especially considering how underfed we all were. But I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. At first, Judith had been radiant. She had hung on Father Isaac's words, trusting that what she carried inside was a miracle baby. Yet as the months passed, my kind and charming sister became increasingly withdrawn. Eventually, Judith stopped speaking altogether. She spent more and more time in bed, eyes closed, hands folded atop her growing belly. Apart from her shallow breathing, I could barely tell that she was alive at all. Father Isaac, too, had taken a step back from family life. He wandered through the hallways like a lost explorer without a compass, muttering prayers, starting projects, and leaving the work half finished. He seemed to have finally reached the limits of his conviction. With Judith incapacitated and Father Isaac unhinged, the burden of maintaining our underground home fell entirely on my shoulders. Tasks that had previously been done by all 5 of us were now mine alone. It was too much, especially considering how malnourished I was. I wound up focusing on only the basics, keeping us fed, caring for bedridden Judith, and plugging the worst of the leaks in the rear hallway. One afternoon, when I was spooning some thin, tasteless vegetable broth between Judith's lips, her eyes suddenly snapped open. She grabbed my hand and placed it on her stomach, which was too big now to be contained by any clothing. "You know," Judith whispered, "this thing I've got inside, I don't think it's human. Can't you feel it?" Something pulsed beneath Judith's skin. It reminded me unsettlingly of a squirming fish eager to escape from a net. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but I couldn't find the words. And then the lights went out. It was the beginning of the end. With the power gone, we had no way to boil water, warm food, or control the temperature of our subterranean prison. During the past 3 years and 11 months, we had burned through more than just food. All of our supplies were worn down or used up, and I knew that the batteries in my flashlight were on their last legs. Unless I could convince Father Isaac to open the hatch, we would all soon be stumbling through a dark and suffocating nightmare. Judith screamed. I felt her flesh contract beneath my hand. Her child was about to arrive. I was fumbling around for my flashlight when someone tugged on the back of my shirt. "Leave," Saul commanded. I finally got my flashlight working, and in its flickering beam, I could see the terror on Judith's face, the beads of sweat forming on her forehead, the bluish veins pulsing beneath her pale skin. Saul watched our sister writhe and claw at the sheets with patient, impassive eyes, like he already knew what the outcome would be. Leaving a child of his age in charge of a birth was insanity, but it was clear to me by now that Saul was no ordinary child. "Leave," Saul repeated, and to my shame, I did.